So let's go ahead and fully explain the 28th Amendment. What is going on with the 28th Amendment? So I started to explain it, but got cut off, and so I like to be thorough. So I'm going to go ahead and finish. Let's just start with the history. In 1923, the first Equal Rights Amendment was proposed, and it failed. In 1946, you had another Equal Rights Amendment that had passed by simple majority in the Senate. Unfortunately, in order to pass an amendment to the Constitution, two major things needs to happen. First, you got to introduce the amendment either by a supermajority, 2/3 of the House and Senate passes the initial amendment language, and then it goes to the states to be approved. You can either get 2/3 of the state legislatures to introduce it or 2/3 of the House and the Senate to introduce the amendment. Once you get the supermajority of both the House and the Senate, then it needs 3/4 of the 50 states. You'll need 38 states to either pass it by legislature or by convention. So the Senate, it had passed by simple majority, 38 to 35, but that wasn't a 2/3 supermajority. So in 1946, again, the Equal Rights Amendment had failed. Now, in 1950 and 1953, the Senate had passed the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, but the House did not pick it up. You need both houses of Congress. 1970, you had a woman by the name of Martha Griffiths, with an S. Martha Griffiths. She got the signatures necessary to push it out of the House Judiciary Committee. And then in 1971, the House is going to pass it by a 2/3 majority. And then 1972, the Senate is going to pass it by a 2/3 majority. So now we need the states to approve it. Once the states approve it, once you get the 38th state to sign on to it, then it becomes law. Then it becomes law. Then the president has to endorse it, sign it, declare it, and then there's something about the archives person. But now we got it out there, right? We got it through the House. We got it through the Congress. We got it through the House and the Senate with 2/3 supermajority. Now what's going to happen? Well, in 1972, you got 22 states that had ratified it. So you had the Congress that had passed it. Now you have to get 3/4 of the 50 states. So you need to get 38 states. Once you get 38 states, then I think technically, even if the president doesn't endorse it, once 38 states passes it, then it's the law. Then it becomes part of the Constitution. I don't care about no parliamentary tricks or what the fuck ever. Once the people, it's the hardest thing in the world to do, to pass an amendment. But once you get 1972, 22 states had passed it by the end of 1972. But that's not 38 states. You still need, 16? So 22 states ratified it by the end of 1972, and then in the next 5 years, you had 13 states that had ratified it. 13 plus 22, that's 35 states total. You still need 3 states to ratify it. Now, in 1978, the deadline, they had a deadline on the resolution. So when they passed the resolution, when it got out of Congress, they said, here's the amendment. And the amendment was pretty simple language. They said that the equality of rights under the law, the equality of the rights between man and woman under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States of America or by any of the 50 states on account of sex. That's it. That's the entire language of it. So that's crystal clear. Can you discriminate against a woman and say, hey, you're not allowed to speak, you're not allowed to petition, you're not allowed to freely do religion, or you can't be a journalist? No, you cannot. A man and a woman, and technically speaking, I'm not even for sure if you even need the Equal Rights Amendment, because those freedoms are for everybody, every adult person, and even some respects, even for, underage Americans. But definitely for the adults. If you're an adult woman, if you're an adult man, then you get American freedoms. So technically, I don't even think you need the Equal Rights Amendment. But just to be sure, just to make sure that nobody's discriminating against woman or man, because by saying you have an equality of rights, then that means if there were some rights that man wasn't getting, Well, he gets equal rights too. Man gets equal rights, woman gets equal rights. Every American citizen gets all the privileges and immunities that's in the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So in 1978, they're going to have to extend the deadline by 3 years. They put a deadline on this thing. And that deadline, there is a mixture of arguments about whether or not the deadline actually applies or doesn't apply. They passed it in the resolution. They said you got 7 years to do it, then they extended it by 3 years, and then it didn't pass in 1982. You only had 35 of 38 states that had passed it. The reason why they had added the deadline because they said that it needs to reflect the contemporary views of the American people. So is this what the American people believe in the 1970s? Do they believe man and woman should have equal rights, equal political rights when it comes to the Constitution? The rule of law, does the rule of law apply to both man and woman? Of course it does. If you're a citizen of this country, then you have a right to a grand jury indictment. You have a right to be free from illegal search and seizures unless there's a warrant. You have a right to remain silent. You have a right to be free from excessive bail, excessive fines, and cruel and unusual punishment. You have all the rights and freedoms that are in the Constitution and the preamble and the 27 amendments. So the reason why they put the deadline on it is because they said they didn't want to have this resolution that was hanging over their heads for decades. So you got 10 years, right? You got 10 years to get the 50 states to pass it. Now, once it gets passed, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, they had the majority of the states that had already passed it, the supermajority, the 3/4 required. But eventually, like 100 years later, you're going to get some of the other states that just sort of ceremonially, symbolically, they're going to pass it too. So the big problem that had happened, you had the deadline. It was in the resolution. So if they didn't put a deadline in the resolution, that's the law that Congress passed. So I just see that the Supreme Court, when they take a look at this, they'll say, well, the law that Congress passed was that they added a deadline. Well, what does the Constitution say? Well, the Constitution doesn't say that there's no time limit in the Constitution, but it also doesn't say unlimited. It doesn't say anything about time. So since Congress had passed the resolution with a very simple language, but they added in the preamble, however you want to say it, you had the language of the amendment. They didn't put it in the language of the amendment. Some of the amendments have it inside the amendment itself, but in the words before the amendment, it said that you had to pass this in 7 years. After 7 years, there was a big debate about if it could even be extended by 3 years. But then in 1982, 35 of 38 states had passed it, so therefore the Equal Rights Amendment had failed. Now, 2017, you're going to have Nevada, Illinois, and Virginia who's going to ratify it. So now some people are saying, well, since 35 of 38 states had passed it in 1982, then 2017, you had 3 more states. Well, that's 38 out of 38 states. But there's a big problem with that, too, because you had 4 states who had rescinded their ratification post-1972. You had, 30-something states that had passed it, but 4 states rescinded their ratification, and then South Dakota specifically conditioned their rescission based upon if it gets enough votes in the deadline. After 10 years, it didn't get enough votes, so therefore South Dakota did not approve it. And then 4 other states. And then which of the 4 other states? I want to say it was Illinois, Kentucky. I don't know. There was 4 other states. So as much as you could say, well, 35 of 38 plus 3, that's 38 of 38. You are up 3 states, but then you went down 5 states. So I think that they have to start from scratch. I think that they got to start from the very beginning. Like I said before, I'm actually 100% in agreement with this amendment. I think it's a smart idea. It's a good idea. Woman has just as many rights. I think, the 19th Amendment, I think that woman is man. Woman is man. She's not as strong as man, but she has the same political rights as man. And that's obvious to me. It's obvious to me. And so woman has a right to speak. Woman has a right to bear arms. Woman has a right to deny soldiers from quartering inside her home. But with the ERA, then her rights would be more secure.